Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, happy World Environment Day. I'm very excited to be able to speak with many of you today. So, my name is Alexandra Potter, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Newcastle, University of New England. Oof, I live in Newcastle, and I am a member of the Manna Institute HDR Community of Practice, and I'm really thrilled to be the moderator of today's webinar. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on today. Manna Institute respectfully acknowledges the First Nations people, sorry, as the continuing custodians of this continent and pays respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today, I come to you from beautiful Awabakal country, where I'm very lucky to live and work, and where the University of Newcastle is, not the University of New England. And I'd really encourage all of you attendees and our speakers, if you'd like to include the country that you are coming to us from today. Please feel free to pop that into the chat. Additionally, Manna Institute acknowledges the voices of lived experience of mental ill health and suicide, and also acknowledges that lived experience takes many different shapes and forms for individuals. And as part of the work of Manna Institute, we reaffirm our commitment to the inclusion of lived experience in all of the work that we do. So today's session is going to be similar to previous webinars. If you've joined us before, if it's your first one, welcome. We're very excited to have you along today as part of World Environment Day. So what we're going to have is a series of presentations and some conversations from our presenters. And then we have put some time aside for a Q&A at the end. You're able to put those questions into the chat throughout the session. But what we'll do, just in terms of continuity and flow, is that we'll save all of the questions until the end. But please feel free to pop in your questions as they come up. So I'm now going to hand over to Associate Professor Eric Breimer from Southern Cross University. And he is our research lead for the Healthy Planet and Healthy People research stream at Manna Institute, who are hosting today's webinar. So I'll hand over to you now, Eric, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much, Alex. Well, welcome everyone. I've only got a very short period of time here just to quickly introduce you to the important people here. The Healthy Planet, Healthy People theme is all about the relationship between human beings and the planet, with a particular interest in the mental health aspect of the rural, regional, and remote areas in Australia. And this year's World Environment Day theme very much aligns with the purpose of the Healthy Planet, Healthy People. If you look closely at some of the slogans they've got there, things like "There is no Planet B," or "Go green before green goes," or things like that. Clean environment, happy life. That's exactly aligned with what we're doing and what this seminar is all about today. I have the enormous pleasure of introducing you to 3 sessions, but 4 speakers. The first session, speaker one, is Vinite Sharma Brahma from the University of Sunshine Coast, and she's been involved in this area across the globe in different different contexts as a practitioner as well as an academic. The second speaker is Waminda Parker, who is from the Nature Fix. She'll talk to you all about what the work she does, which links into the World Environment Day theme and what we're talking about today. And the second session, there are 2 speakers. Both of them are PhD students, but they also have immense lived experience as well within this area, and they're going to talk to you a little bit about a combination of what they're studying, I suppose, and also their lived experience. So without further ado, I guess I'll pass over to you, Vinite, and let you say your say your thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I will say my thing now. I'm just sharing the slides. When I share the slides, I can hardly see anyone there. So bear with me for a moment. Here we go. So I'm just going to share a little bit of my own experience coming from a multicultural context and seeing how we can create meanings and make meanings of our own environment for our own health and well-being. When I say our own environment, I don't see the humans separate from the environment. We are part of the environment is us. So that pretty much grounds my belief and my values that are place based. I We develop relationships, and those relationships influence how we interact with ourselves and the natural world. So before I proceed, I know you have done the acknowledgement of country. I also would like to acknowledge all Indigenous peoples or First Nations peoples of this world, who are actually key actors, key people, key connections to make such meanings, creating that kind of reciprocal relationship, and also giving us the meaning to see the importance of place-based relationships and how they influence our positionality with the natural world. So that enhances our own health and well-being. And this is what I have drawn from the First Nations peoples from India, where I come from. I originate from India, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from Australia. I haven't seen many Indigenous peoples or First Nations peoples in the UK, where I lived for a little while. But I do acknowledge all other, across the whole world, because multiculturality to me involves and includes everybody. So with that, healing, nurturing, relational, and reciprocal, I'm supposed to be using my academic lens, academic brain here. But what have developed in these few slides, there are exactly 5 slides because it's the 5th of June in World Environment Day. Um, but I haven't used a lot of the academic literature or academic references, etc., except for these two women, Robin Kimmerer from Canada and Mary Graham from Australia, who I draw from to position myself and all other people who are interested in seeing those relationships with the natural world as healing, nurturing, relational, and reciprocal. So these two women have created such profoundly meaningful stories that intertwine. They have that interrelationship, interconnectedness, and the stories pretty much, they say all our life stories are intertwining with several things. It can be science, it can be arts, it can be spirit, our own spirituality, and all our stories, old, new, emerging, etc. And relationship with the natural world is medicinal, which I have been practicing ever since I was a child, because I have been born into a family of Ayurvedic medicinal system practitioners. So wherever I go, I see medicine in my food, medicine in my backyard, or medicine in the plants I grow, and all the photographs, the features of the nature that you see there are from my own house, my own yard, and they're all edibles. So I see food, I see medicine, I see my story, I see multicultural perspective, and I see health and well-being. So these are all our stories too. And they represent language, they represent people's beliefs, people's practices, and how they want to live and connect with the world, not only human world, but also the natural world. Because as you can see there, Mary Graham says that relation between people and land becomes the template for society and social relationship. So that is how we grow ourselves. That is how we grow relationships. That is how we grow healing, nurturing, and reciprocal world, that we care for each other through our stories, through telling, sharing our stories. Not only with humans, I share my stories with bees, bugs, butterflies, birds, bats, and all creatures that come to my garden and they connect with the flowers, the leaves, the fruits, and every part of the climbing vines, or the prickly, really, really thorny native raspberry there, or the African basil that you see there, cranberry, hibiscus you see there. So these are all our health. These are all our well-being. The signs of well-being. These are healthy ecosystems. And these are all stories that we make for ourselves, because we are humans. We create stories. And we want to see some meaning in those stories. What are those meanings? our health stories, our health meanings are also creating that healthy relationship with the ecosystem, so that we become reciprocal. We care for each other, we care for the bird cares for us, because it takes the seeds from my garden and probably puts the seeds somewhere else. It spreads that message of looking after each other. And this is really representation of multicultural food, multicultural plants, multicultural practices, and also multicultural perspectives in looking after the environment. Through that, we look after ourselves. For example, the on the left-hand side, the plant there, which grows into a big tree also, a long, sticky tree, is actually cassava. The ground, the tuber that we in Australia, it's used as food. And the leaves are apparently used in Africa from African communities. And the second one is African spinach. And the third one is moringa, moringa leaves, moringa flowers. And the fourth one here is mother of herbs, also called, so there is some other native name for that. So these actually, why am I showing these photographs? Because they are intercontinental. They are grown in here in Australia. Many of these are also grown indigenously in the native climate across the whole country. Mother of herbs, I have grown mother of herbs in Victoria, in New South Wales, and it grows in plenty here in Queensland, where I'm located right now, and African spinach here. Moringa, they are also growing very well in parts of New South Wales. So this is all actually healing, because every single one of these food types, plant types, is medicinal, is food, is multicultural, and they can be grown very easily without, with very less water, with very less nutrition. So it can be grown in Asia, it is growing in Africa. It is growing here in Australia. So we bring those stories with us and we see those meanings in looking after the environment. We plant these, we look after the environment, we look after ourselves also. Now, these are also good examples in times of natural disasters, climate change, in drought conditions, in flooding conditions, where the environmental degradation can be seen through commercial farming, and when there is less food production, there is more commercial cropping, etc. These are the things that we can remember, that we have value in our own cultural practices, culture-based foods, so that we look after the environment, we look after ourselves. So land cares for us, we care for the land. Lastly, there are two real nice stories here that I want to share. Fostering the development of a reflective relational self, that is place-based relationality. Again, going back to Graham and Kimmerer, the two stories here are very, very nourishing stories. One is the fire pit. This is not really a fire pit. This is actually cooking stove, which my mother used to use. It has a history, probably as far as I can remember. My mother must have got this when she was a young adult, young woman who got married and who started cooking. Probably, I can only guess that it could be about 60 to 70 years old, little cooking stove. And you put the wood, and here I have used it as not only a cooking stove, but also a camping fire pit when we went camping here in Queensland. Now, that is intergenerational, profoundly important to heal, to nurture, and to be relational self in when migrants go over to other countries, when they migrate to countries for various reasons, they carry with them these multicultural beliefs, perspectives, cultural practices, etc. It gives immense confidence, hope, as well as nurturance. It connects us to local environments, and it connects us to stories of life. So that's my story also, that I see so much meaning in it. And I also wanted to emphasize the importance of fire. Fire is sacred in the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's perspectives. Similarly, fire is sacred in India. Fire is also sacred in African countries. However, in the neoliberal capitalist, probably industrialized societies, fire has got probably has lost that significance or the cultural value. So when we return to these stories, we feel that warmth, the nurturance, and that place-based relationality grows stronger. The other story also represents that place-based relationality. The simple banana branch here with the flower. Um, 3, 4 years ago, probably it was 2021. I belong to a gardening group, community gardening group, and a lot of the members were asking how do they use the banana flower because banana flowers were going to a waste. And once, I actually photographed the various stages of cooking a banana flower because we used to cook banana flower in India. So I knew the recipe and I knew how to cook that. And I photographed every single stage of cooking, making food from a banana flour and put it on the Facebook of this community gardening group. And it got more than 600 views. I didn't know because I'm not the administrator of this Facebook page. But the administrator later on, a few weeks later, said to me it had received more than 600 views and probably made the banana flower so famous. And now a lot of the community gardening members do cook because they know how to cook a banana flower. And that also actually becomes place based, relational, reciprocal, and looking after land kind of story for us because we can use now what was going to a compost bin has now become food for us. Not all parts of the banana flower will become food. The inner core of the flower is turned into food, whereas outer layers can still go into compost bin. Worms, yeah, and also probably scatter that outside anywhere. And bugs, bees also we look after and eat and be happy. And all these stories are actually our stories. We need to make them our authentic stories and we need to share these stories. And when we share those stories, it becomes a nice intertwined, sweetgrass braid. We weave those stories, we weave those meanings. And probably there is no plastic in any of these photographs. So, plastic free world today. That's the message of the World Environment Day. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I'll stop sharing. And I would love some questions if anybody has.
So what we'll do, if anyone has questions, there's two options. You can pop it directly into the chat box, but we also have a question and answer section of down the bottom, or depending on how your Zoom's set up. So please feel free to pop those in there, and then at the end we will come back together and answer any questions. But we will go on to the next speaker, and then we'll do questions at the end.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so shall I start sharing my screen?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing at Nature Fix around the health benefits of nature, but specifically around bushfire recovery. And I feel like I'm stating the very, very obvious, aren't I, here? Like when we go into nature, we can heal. It's so crucial for our part of our recovery. Incredibly soothing, really important for our self-regulation. And, I argue it's at the foundation of our strength and resilience. And when we're dealing with, these crises around mental health and planetary health, we argue that nature is at the absolute underpinning of addressing these. And we do say there is a but. And the reason why we say there is a but is we know, we all know nature is good for us. But if it's just a walk in the park, we argue that we're missing out on a whole range of additional health benefits. Getting off your phone, spending an hour in nature, we know you are going to get a whole range of health benefits and you're going to feel much better. But there's other forms of nature or aspects of nature that's currently been untapped, and that's what we want to talk about today. And of course, no one understands the health benefits more so than our First Nations here and indeed globally. Perhaps best described by this wonderful this expression, healthy people, healthy country, you know, this relationship is completely intertwined and inseparable. And I think I really want to just hammer this point of distinction, you know, this relationship to connection to country. It's completely embedded in cultural identity and practice, this connection, you know, kingship, law, ceremony. And of course, the science is only catching up to what's been known for a very long time. And I think it's really important that we respectfully acknowledge this as we move forward. I do want to acknowledge country. I'm calling in from Gadigal lands here in Sydney and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and say there is such depth and wisdom and the connections to country and connection to culture that we're still only just grappling and catching up on. But this, you know, this relationship, it's in all of us. When you think about it, you know, it's in our DNA. And it makes total sense, because if you think about even for our own perspectives, for some of us, it's only about 6 generations that we've been in those more urban contexts around the Industrial Revolution, but by comparison, well over 350,000 generations in nature. So it does make sense that all of our biological and physiological processes are completely adapted to the natural world, to the point of all of our neurological process has evolved with nature. So even today, when we get cues from nature, our minds and bodies are responding to those cues, even though we may not be consciously aware of that. So this concept around nature being a really valuable health solution is really starting to, you know, grow and grow in strength. Certainly, we've heard things around nature therapy, but more and more so, we're hearing concepts around nature prescription. It's becoming more commonplace. Really important for preventative healthcare and self-care, but equally as important as a treatment, anywhere sort of from acute to recovery service, particularly around mental health. But as we argue, it's about how we engage with the natural world is where we can maximize those health outcomes. And lots of research here across our mental health, physical health, planetary health. You know, 10 years ago, we had about, you know, a handful of publications. You know, 2 years ago, we had over 1,500, you know, and this is growing exponentially. So just looking at some of the benefits of nature, you know, the health benefits, just starting with the contact benefits. For example, trees release this wonderful compound called phytocyans. It has these sort of anti-protein and anti-cancer impacts and properties on us. We know that getting out, and particularly the morning sunlight, get those healthy levels of vitamin D, great melatonin levels, help with regulate our sleep patterns. You know, the probiotic industry, billion-dollar industry, right? Turns out we can just put our hands in healthy organic soil to get the same outcome. So these are just examples of just contact benefits with nature. Just being in nature, you can access these benefits. But here's the thing, and this is the point that we really want to make. This is a salient point. When we connect with nature, something incredibly powerful happens. We can access a whole range of additional health benefits beyond contact benefits alone. As we like to say, it's not just the contact with nature, but it's the nature of that contact that really counts. So it's not about having minutes in nature, it's developing meaningful moments with nature. You know, it becomes more than a walk in the park. Kind of like going to the gym. When you go to the gym, you don't just look at the equipment. To get the health benefits, you need to engage on a regular basis. And, you know, for some of us, we might need support, guidance to start that process, how to use that equipment. And it's the exact same with nature. And this concept around nature connection or nature connectedness, it's now being defined as a psychological measure of the quality of our relationship with the rest of nature. Let's not forget that we are nature, as a reminder there. And we can actually measure an individual's level of nature connectedness. There's a whole bunch of metrics and scorings that are taking place around that. And this metric and scoring is repeatedly showing that it's correlated with increases in joy and happiness, nervous system regulation, and eudaimonic well-being, having that sense of a worthwhile life. One paper in particular in Tasmania found it was 8 times more important for life satisfaction than changes in our socioeconomic status. So incredibly powerful. And as you would expect, high nature connection, high conservation outcomes. You know, one paper citing 64 times more likely to undertake pro-environmental behaviours. Okay, so if we know that contact with nature is good, but connection is better, how can we reliably give this to individuals? I mean, others are doing it in different forms, but this is how we're doing it. And you will be right to say that we're using the exact same device that's fueling, you could argue, is fueling disconnection and anxiety, but just about everyone has one, right? So we want it to see it as a doorway back to nature. So we're designing it in a way, it's like, how do we go through the screen? How do we use this to go back through the screens back into the natural world? So see it kind of as a guiding coach. And we've designed well over about 150 specifically short guided audio activities or guided activities as audios that we can match to different types of nature that we know increase well-being. So for example, we know that looking at repeated patterns or fractal type patterns in nature increases alpha wave activities in our brain and can reduce, some studies suggest, stress levels by up to 60%. So incredibly powerful and happens, within minutes, And we've pulled these activities, structured activities, in a very structured 5-step to connect framework or flow of engagement with nature or prescribing engagement with nature. And I don't have time to go through this slide in detail, but just to say that this 5-step formula approach is trauma-informed. It essentially realigns us to those evolutionary cues that I mentioned earlier, helps to increase not only our self-regulation, but we engage with nature to the point where actually nature starts to become a therapeutic intervention and operates as a co-therapist. And we're installing these programs so people can access, because we want the health benefits to go to people to access as trails and zones, and we've done them specifically in response to bushfire recovery as well. And an example of that is the Snowy Valleys Nature Wellness Trail, which includes where we partnered with the Murrumbidgee Local Health District, and we've installed trails, nature wellness trails across 6 of the townships across the Snowy Valleys. See it as a vision, if you like, as nature recovers, communities recover. So we're using it as a healing tool as part of that recovery process. Importantly, we consulted heavily with communities. Where do we place these stops, places? What's important to the community as part of that recovery process? Importantly, access to areas that communities could access, but such as the local sort of walks, popular walk sites, but also really importantly, we wanted to be so that clinicians could take their clients or consumers down to these sites so it becomes a therapeutic intervention. And we've designed a whole range of furnishing to enhance that nature connection experience, such as our Sky Seat at Pilot Hill and our listening pod. And why is this so important in terms of bushfire recovery? I'm sure the next speaker will probably touch on this a lot more. But just as a touch point, we know that the climate emergency is a human health emergency as well, particularly around mental health. Research confirming, 1 in 4 who have experienced a direct experience, climate change experience, fulfills PTSD screening. We know the growing impact of eco-anxiety, particularly on our young. And so building on this work of the Nature Wellness Trail through the Snowy Valleys, we're actually now running a clinical trial. Thank you very much to Eric, working with Southern Cross University, where the clinicians are actually using the trails as a structured 6-week program for those individuals that have been impacted by the fires, and obviously the frontline workers and operators through the health sector and emergency service sectors, and those experiencing PTSD. And I know it's early days and we haven't crunched the numbers, but the feedback has been profound, so encouraging. It isn't just a walk in the park. It is a life-changing experience for these individuals. So these guided, structured activities, we want to give them, the individuals, the life skills that they can use them in part of their everyday nature for their own well-being. I pulled out one comment because I really love it, because I think it really does emphasize what we're trying to achieve. It's just like, I feel like all the ropes have just fallen off. It's like I've been pulled in 1,000 directions of all these ropes pulling on me. Well, they just fell off. And that's what nature does. In addition to the trails and the zones, we run training programs. We absolutely love running training programs. If anyone's interested, please shout out. We run training programs for healthcare workers, clinicians, but also for organisations that want to build nature-based health solutions into their workplace practice. And I'll finish on, if you have a nature wellness trail near you, all you need to do is scan this QR code, download the NatureFix app for free and find a trail near you. If there isn't a trail near you, you could access, there's a whole range of solo activities. You can try it in your own green space, and I'll finish it there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Kate and Zara, you are our final speakers, and then we'll go through to some questions.
So I think I think Zara wanted me to go first. So for those of you who didn't catch her with at the beginning, I'm Kate, and I am one of the Manna HDR scholarship recipients. I am looking broadly at mental health impacts of environmental change in rural and regional communities. So specifically, my research is more focused on the kind of chronic and pervasive emotional responses to environmental change, and how those emotional responses impacting mental health in rural regional communities, and kind of flowing on from Wominda's amazing work, looking at how we can use nature and our relationships with nature to reduce negative mental health impacts of those emotional responses. So I guess some examples of the emotional responses I'm talking about, some words you might have heard kind of out there are eco-anxiety, ecological grief, and solastalgia, which is kind of that feeling of homesickness while still at home. So losing that feeling of solace that your home provides due to an environmental change. So before I kind of dive into that more deeply, I think it's important to acknowledge that these kind of emotional responses in the face of the large-scale environmental degradation and existential threat of climate change that we're experiencing are completely appropriate and normal emotional responses, and that just experiencing them is certainly not a form of psychopathology. But when we have such a broad-scale threat that is going to impact all of us, and limited action occurring, it's important that we recognise that it is a chronic and largely uncontrollable for most of us stressor that is going to have significant impact on our mental well-being going forward. So I thought I'd give a little bit of my story, and how I got here, acknowledging upfront that these impacts of environmental change and natural disasters are not distributed evenly amongst us, and there are layers of this vulnerability, particularly in our rural communities, and that I am going to give you my story from a point of extreme privilege, I suppose. While I live in an area that is on the front line of climate change, I'm very fortunate to have not lost my home, not lost any loved ones, humans or non-human, to a natural disaster. But I have I think, somewhat unique perspective as a clinical psychologist living in the Northern Rivers that I think is worth sharing. So I did my honours project back in 2009 around motivating support for climate change policy, and as a somewhat naive early 20s, finished that project and thought that climate change was going to be solved, and so that my psychology degree was probably better used in clinical area. So I went down the path of clinical psych, and during my training we moved to the Northern Rivers, and that was somewhere we chose to live because of the amazing natural environment around here. It was somewhere we'd always been drawn to, for the beaches, the rainforest, the bushland, the rural area and the outdoor lifestyle. But in my time working and living here, I have witnessed and experienced the impacts of extreme weather events in my local community. So the first was the 2017 lashing of Cyclone Debbie, which resulted in record-breaking flooding in Lismore, which is about half an hour from where I live. So while my house was high above floodwaters, I found myself at home 3 weeks post-caesarean section with a newborn baby. And the Pacific Highway went under, and my husband got stuck at work, and my extended family were all also on the other side of the flooded part of the highway. So I was in a new home with a newborn baby, unable to drive, and with no power or water for a couple of days, which was a pretty harrowing experience. On returning to work after my maternity leave, I noticed that in my clients there was this real shift in the way that they talked about their life. So they kind of categorized it of life before the flood and life after the flood, like it had fundamentally changed them. But despite that, they mostly remained positive about their ability to rebuild their lives and bounce back. But these floods were then followed by unprecedented drought that culminated in the Black Summer bushfires. And in the Northern Rivers, heritage rainforests that had never previously burned were destroyed by fire. And for myself, I found I was again isolated in my home with my second baby, this time trying to keep our lungs clear of the smoke and ash that blanketed the sky for weeks. So while that drought was eventually broken and the fires were extinguished by rain, this rain marked the beginning of an unprecedented 3 back-to-back La Ninas, and these conditions soaked the east coast of Australia for at least 2 years, which has now continued to more like 4 or 5 years. But in our area, in 2022, record-breaking floods rose to a whole new level, and entire towns were swallowed by rivers and submerged for days or even weeks. Many places without power, without access for up to 3 weeks post the floods. And then another flood came a month after that first flood, and some areas were flooded even more intensely by the second flood. So within our community, there was just collective exhaustion and depression, and those, even those of us who still had our homes, still had all our possessions, all our loved ones, there was still grief about the changes that we could see in the environment around us, and this anxiety around what life was going to be like in this area going forward. The number of times I heard people say, is this our new normal? In the months following the floods when the rain continued, I can't even count. So in my clinical practice, there was a real stark contrast. So where there had been that upbeat, resilient outlook after the 2017 floods and everyone wanting to get back to normal life, after the 22 floods, there was anger at government, there was grief, a loss of homes and businesses and the way of life. There was anxiety, there's overwhelm and helplessness around what the future held. And there was also a lot of criticism around both the crisis support and the longer term support that was provided in the aftermath of the floods. So it did become clear to me that my toolbox of clinical skills and the structure of the health system I was working in were not well equipped to help people in the face of this existential threat of climate change and the resulting environmental destruction. And this is particularly true in our rural and regional areas that are highly exposed. We are on the front line and we're already underserviced for mental health. So that's how I came to do this PhD. And I think some of the issues that I have seen in my clinical practice is that we have a real individual focus. We look at a single person and their single pathology. And in this context of this, as we've heard from the others today, this real relational problem, and it's a societal, broad scale systematic issue. And so to have this individual focus is problematic in a number of ways. And we also need to be looking at solutions or preventative strategies that have co-benefits, not just for people, but for our environment, because we know these issues of this mental health crisis that we have and this environmental crisis are deeply entwined, and we should be viewing them and responding to them as such. Cool. That's all I have to say.
I guess it's me now, isn't it? Thanks, Kate. That was great. Yeah, so similarly to Kate, I am also a PhD student on the Gold Coast. I don't have any clinical experience or anything like Kate does. I came straight from my bachelor's degree into an honours degree, which looked at a similar thing to Kate in the terms of like eco-anxiety and these climate anxiety sort of, don't want to call them disorders, but things, phenomenons, and their relationship to pro-environmental behaviours, which Wominda briefly touched on before, and their relationship to mental health. And what I found just in a correlational analysis was that there was a positive relationship between people who engaged in these pro-environmental behaviours and mental well-being. But what we didn't know, and what we still don't really know, is sort of what comes first, whether acting and caring for the environment increases your mental health, or whether people who have better mental health are more likely to engage in these behaviours. And that's sort of the broad question that my PhD is trying to answer, because if it is the case that pro-environmental behaviours increase mental health, then if we want to combat both the climate problem and the mental health problem, then we can directly look at getting people to engage in pro-environmental behaviours. But if it's the other way around, maybe we just need to look at increasing mental well-being, and we can do that through nature contact and whatnot. So I'm just exploring that sort of theme in general. I guess for a bit of background on my lived experience, I grew up in a family where nature was just the centerpiece of everything that we did. It was in a beautiful home out the back of Tullabudra in the hinterland on the Gold Coast. And whilst as a teenager, we had a terrible internet connection, I was never close to any of my friends. It made for one very angsty teen, and it was definitely a time where I was like, I don't want to get my hands dirty. Looking back on it now, it is so important, and it has shaped so much of who I am as an adult now. And just seeing how important that kind of mindset is, because climate change used to be such an abstract concept. We didn't really know, we saw it on the news, but it was nothing that we directly experienced in my childhood. But suddenly we were getting these heat waves, and it got to the point where we didn't want to leave the house for Christmas in case a fire came through. And what would we do if we weren't in the house if a fire came through? So it was the unpredictability of the weather and just the uncertainty of what another summer was going to feel like. So I guess, where do I go from here? I probably don't have a good way around as Kate does, but the problem that I'm seeing now with a lot of the research in like pro-environmental behavior, mental well-being, is that there's a gap between what people say they're going to do and what they actually do. And we call that the value action gap. Like, we want to live sustainably, but somewhere this gets lost and it doesn't actually translate into direct action. It's sort of like signing up for a gym and then never using the membership. We all mean well, but something's getting in the way, and there's lots of factors contributing to this. And I think the largest is how we are framing pro-environmental behaviours in this way, that we have to sacrifice what we feel we've rightfully earned in order for the benefit of society. And I think that's a lot due to sort of a capitalistic society that we're living in, where consumption is the ultimate theme to happiness, and this idea that living a lifestyle that focuses on less really emphasizes inconvenience and sacrifice. So I think if we can change the way that that's framed into what someone has to gain from engaging in these behaviors, it can be really powerful to promoting both pro-environmental behaviors and as well tackling sort of a mental health crisis at the same time. That's all I got.
Amazing. That's excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. What brilliant presentations that I think just covered a huge amount of components, but also I think really strong messages coming through. I really stood out to me was that idea of, connection and relationship. While people put some questions into the Q&A box and or the chat, whichever one you'd like. Eric, did you have any reflections? And then I can pop a couple of questions through to people. Eric, was there anything you wanted to reflect on from hearing the different speakers today?
Yeah, I sort of a couple of things that threaded through all of everybody's sort of thing, which I think are so important. And I think sort of Zara's last few words sums it up quite nicely. We really do have to rethink the way that we speak about the human nature relationship, so that instead of it being something that is outside of us and separate from us, we appreciate, like everybody has appreciated today, that we are nature, we are part of the nature. But for some reason, from a cultural, systematic policy perspective, that the grasping that hasn't happened so well, especially from an Anglo-European type of perspective, even though it perhaps has in other cultures. And trying to reframe that, I think, will make a large difference in the way that we in the way that we relate. So I think that's one really important thing. The other really important thing, I think, is that the key, or one of the key principles I was listening to everybody's talk, is that there is no human health without planetary health. And the interlinking, the intertwined relationship there is vital for all the things that we're talking about. None of the sort of human health, and especially from what we're thinking about perspective, the mental health side of things, can really function effectively if we're interested in human mental health without a healthy planet and therefore a healthy relationship with our natural environment. So those are the two major things I got from it. But I'm sure people listening got other things and have other fantastic questions they would like to explore.
Thanks so much, Eric. I'm going to throw a question over to the panel. So whoever wants to answer first, please feel free to jump in. But thinking about World Environment Day, and Eric touched on, I guess, some of the slogans and the things that go out. Obviously, there's a theme every year, but I think one of the things that Eric touched on that really stuck with me, and I think came up in all of the presentations, was, there is no planet B, and this real kind of um, yeah, resonance that has, as Eric said, with this idea of, if we're looking after the land, we're looking after ourselves. So my question, just thinking in relation to World Environment Day, is what's, I guess, kind of one thing, and this is kind of a magic wand question, but what do you think of one of those key things that people can do or that we can be doing, whether it's from a Manna perspective or all the different work represented at the panel today, that can really, I guess, emphasize that for people? What's that thing that makes that link for people to see that actually, yes, when we're looking after the land, we're looking after ourselves? Is there one thing you'd like everybody to start doing on a daily basis or a weekly basis? Anybody got a quick one to answer that, or can I volunteer somebody? I was going to looking at you, Waminda, just thinking about some of the nature prescription thing. Is there
Yeah.
one thing that you would get people to do to really
Look,
encourage that connection?
so to be with me, I worked in the environment movement for over 25 years. That was my core and belief, and I got and my own mental health was impacted as a result, just hearing the negativity around, climate change impacts, etc. And so this is where I did start this connection story. And so to me, I see nature connection as the absolute core of actually addressing the planetary health and also the human health aspects. And I think the other thing I want to do as a point of distinction is around, when I talked about those cultural connections to country, it is part of ceremony, practice, law. I think what we do, we see nature as a nice to have, not an essential to have. And we see, oh, you can do that on your lunch break. Well, no, we shouldn't. We need to advocate. It needs to be built into practice. And I think we're really missing a fundamental ingredient of how we build it into our lifestyle more. From the day we're born to the day we die, we should be it should be built into practice, into the workplace and our livability. And I think, but not just contact with nature, but connection, building that relationship with nature is key.
It's really interesting. I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day who doesn't claim to be sort of a planetary savior or anything like that, but apparently he was playing golf wearing a t-shirt that said there is no planet B. And he said that's the first time in his life that he's actually had relatively aggressive teasing, etc., because of having worn that t-shirt. And to me, I suppose that kind of underpins what we were saying, in that the perspective that there is a planet B, that actually there is somewhere else to go, or that it doesn't really matter what the state of the planet is, we can still do all the things that we think are important, is still there very powerfully. And it'd be nice to see that change. I suppose it depends, for me, it depends where you are, to answer your question, Alex, in that kind of continuum of whether you believe or don't believe. So if we're talking about how can we maybe impact people who are, who are kind of on the fence and not quite sure how important it is, and that's to pay attention to big aspects of nature. It doesn't matter where you are, whether it's the flower in the concrete, or whether it's the kind of, as Dinah was saying earlier on, the butterfly that lands on your tree, or whatever it is. But paying attention, we know from research that just trying to reflect on three good things that you have observed in the natural world can change the way that you feel about that relationship, but also your own sense of well-being. So maybe that's one thing that we can all do, just spending a few minutes a day paying attention and reflecting on, and maybe even documenting three things in the natural world that we think are really, really important.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just building on that, Vinitha, you talked about the banana flour cooking, and I was fascinated by that, and I love that connection of the Facebook group and being able to kind of share that because as Wominda talked about, sometimes we have to use the tools that may be affecting us negatively to be that doorway. I guess what really came to me from your presentation, and I think it came up in all of the presentations, was that translation of knowledge and being able to. And I think one of the things is that we are losing that and has lost a bit of that in relation to nature. And I think if we look at our First Nations, peoples across the world, there's some very good examples of what that looks like in best practice. And unfortunately, I think we have some very good examples of what that looks like when it's not being done well from non-First Nations people. I guess my question was just in relation to, what do you see moving forward in terms of, capturing that knowledge, whether it be kind of your own local community garden level, and then obviously kind of from within the academic level so that we're able to not lose that.
Well, if I switch my academic brain off, I can very confidently say there is a lot happening out there in the communities around the world. Because recently I was in India and also an active, member of the gardening group here in Queensland, and also looking at my other friends, how they are, responding to what's happening in the natural world and the disasters, etc. To give one example, in India, in the last 25 years, India went through a massive, massive change through globalization. Before, as I was leaving India, globalization was stepping in. And I grew up not knowing plastic, believe it or not. There was very little plastic. I'm not that old. Don't think that I'm, 80 or 90 years old. I'm not. So it was that kind of lifestyle, where the economy was not very important. Social relations were important. Cultural practices were important. Traditional ecological knowledges were important because India was not fully an industrialized society at that time. So becoming an IT country, industrialized country, economy changes happened and the perspective changed totally in the last 25 years. Consumption, consumer culture stepped in. There was so much plastic everywhere in the last 20 years. Last year, the governments started banning using plastic bags in shopping complexes. So last January, when I was in India, people were packing things in paper bags. And a lot of my own relatives, family relatives, and friends were growing in small scales food on their terrace, rooftop gardens. And a lot of my own friends have quit their jobs and gone into organic farming. And they are producing food in such a way. And with food, they are bringing culture back. They are bringing stories back. They are actually celebrating. There is social, environmental, economic movement happening in such a large scale that cannot be captured in the academic knowledge, for academic knowledge. So very little is actually brought into academic focus. So that's why I said, we can't use academic lens all the time, but we need to capture these practitioner perspectives, community-based practices, and especially community voice, community movements, etc. Same thing is happening here in Australia. There is so much happening in the First Nations communities. They are bringing bush tucker, they are bringing culture back. Their cultural practices celebrated through, clothes, designs, music, arts, performances, exhibitions, etc. That is actually not captured in academic knowledge. So we are missing a lot, but we are not missing a lot if we open our eyes and if we actually reconnect with the communities. I don't know. It was a long-winded.
No, it was. As someone who asks long-winded questions, that was thank you very much. We've only got a couple more minutes left, so I will take this moment to say a huge thank you on behalf of Manna Institute to our wonderful speakers and presenters today, and also to recognise the work of Eric. And there was a little working group behind the scenes from the Healthy Planet, Healthy People research stream at the Manna Institute. These webinars happen every month, roughly, and we do like to try and tie it into a theme. So it's a really good opportunity to hear about, I guess, the breadth as well of the different pieces of work, both place-based, community level things. I really like the Sky Lounge Waminda. I want to try and find one of those near me. It's beautiful. But also hearing about the research work that Kate and Zara are doing, and I think how many unprecedented and record-breaking things we can have in one time, I think is a huge ongoing challenge when we think about healthy planet, healthy people. But if you are interested in more information about the work that the Healthy Planet, Healthy People stream are doing, you can go to the Manna website or connect in with any of our speakers. I'm sure we're happy to send through some information. We will put together this recording and it will go up on the website. So if there was pieces that you wanted to go back to or you'd like to share it with your colleagues, please feel free to do that. But once again, a huge thank you to our speakers, a huge thank you to Eric and the team from Healthy Planet, Healthy People, and for all of you for joining us today. And I hope everyone has an excellent World Environment Day and enjoys some sunshine if it's sunny where you are, or get out and dance in the rain if it's rainy where you are. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Alex, as well, for your support.
No worries.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Anybody wants to join Healthy Planet, Healthy People, please feel free to reach out. We're very keen to talk to people and build those relationships. And thank you very much, everybody, from me as well.
Thank you. Thanks all.